Welcome to Impumelelo Mentorship podcast, where I made the commitment to rise as I rise with others by making mentorship accessible to all. Since the honor of being selected as a Miss South Africa runner-up on August 10th, 2024, I've been dedicated to sparking meaningful conversations that inspire our young people. I'm really thrilled to have had one of my mentors, Mike Sharman, who is an author of 2 books, one that I've read, which is called Brandalism, and the entrepreneur founder of Retroviral. Mike shares his journey, insights, and expertise in branding, community building, and diversifying as an individual. So, listen in on this inspiring conversation. Mike, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You are exceptional. You've been doing so amazing. I know I met you about 3 years ago when I just moved into a executive assistant role at the Zebra. And I was working closely with AB Mokhatswane. And he had said, there's a gent I know who can come and speak to us and he can showcase his book, which is
For Dazzle Day.
For Dazzle Day. And the book is called Brandalism. I mean, there was another book. This is your second book, but we won't talk about that one yet.
Yeah, that one.
And Mike, I thought you were exceptional in that stage, right? I knew that you have your own business called Retroviral, but I didn't really know your story. Who are you? What are you about? I know you like the marketing guru,
Thank you.
the brand guru,
Thank you.
the digital communications guru, but you can just, enlighten us about your life, your journey. What has unfolded over time for you to get to where you are as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I think what's been really exciting is that this retroviral journey is almost at 15 years. That's why you can see the crow's feet and the gray. We're going to ask the editor to grade out the gray. But it's been almost 15 years, and I think it's been just an incredible journey day after day. Like I had a previous experience working in traditional comms, 18 months in London and 2 years prior in South Africa. And I got to a stage where there was so much interest and questioning around social media.
Yes.
It felt very similar to the world that we're in now around AI. And every day there was a question around social media. How do we incorporate it into our traditional comms approach? So for me, I had this obsession living in London at the time, going on the tube, the bus, a walk, always just following and scrolling through Twitter to see what celebrities, early adopters were talking about. And for me, it was just such a fascinating intersection between the PR and traditional comms work I was doing, because a lot of the early adopters in South Africa in particular were journalists or DJs. And that was how they were using Twitter as their playground. And to work with influencers at the time, it became a really good way to short circuit. Hey, I want to work with this person because they are both famous and they have a channel. And if you think about it, journalists were they were the OG influencers, because a journalist could talk from one to many. They had the channel, they had the platforms, they had the radio stations, and there was so much of that traditional PR world that helped connect to that digital influencer world. And for me, it was something that I dived straight into because I felt that there was this almost holy trinity of marketing that we call it. So digital, PR, and activation. And those things needed to come together, because the more digitally savvy we become, the more we crave human interaction. And I think that's it's a constant lesson for the time of the lives that we are in. And we're going to talk about it a little bit later around moments, pandemics, all this hectic stuff. But the digital savviness and the tools and the stuff that we adopt on an ongoing basis, there's always the need from people, generally multinationals or corporates, to enlighten, educate. How do we take this thing and how do we continue to cut through the clutter to become the unique, remarkable unicorn that we want to be in our specific industry?
Yeah, and I think you say something so potent in saying, how do we adapt or adopt? But sometimes I find that as young people, it's very easy to kind of have the ideation and to see what's currently happening. And when you already saw the future that we were going into. So how do we then prepare ourselves to start adopting and adapting to the future and seeing what's coming and being a bit more agile to say, okay, I'm in the space that I'm in, whether it's the degree I'm studying, but it's an ever evolving, volatile, scary world. So how do I stay ahead of the curve rather?
So I think the major thing is about experimentation. So what's the thing that you're interested in, and what's the playground that you could flex your own skills, right? So for me, it was like, I really love Twitter. I love the immediacy of the copy. For me, I'm like a word nerd. So I really love the way that those things would come to life. And Twitter was the space for me to really enjoy the humor and the sarcasm around words. And for me, being able to build an insight and an understanding around that space, I love TikTok because even now, like I can shoot a few seconds of video here, there, and then even using AI and auto cuts, you can create the most beautiful portrait 9:16 shots that you can then bring to life with music, with an edit. You don't even need all those skills. And I think that's the exciting thing about the world we're in now. People are like, oh my goodness, AI is going to take your job. But what I think is that the tools help you to enhance your way to go from 0 to 1 a lot quicker. And if you're not experimenting, if you're not executing on your own personal brand and your own level, then you're going to struggle to stand out from the crowd of your peers that are finishing their studies or getting into like those entry level positions in a corporate or in a brand, in an agency. And it's always about how can you experiment to educate those around you. And if your heart is set with the intention of educating peers and clients, like you'll be able to stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Mike, standing out from the crowd is one thing. And you've got to find that distinctiveness about you. What makes you different? What is the new thing that you're going in for? But sometimes I feel, as the youth, we kind of want to find that now, immediately. And I think that takes time to unfold. I mean, you've had a very different career before your entrepreneurship journey. And I'd like you to just deep dive into that. Like what is that perspective, that shift, that unknown that you went into at some point? What was that journey like?
So for me, I think I was fortunate because I had a bit of an idea of what I wanted to study. And, obviously I was privileged that I was able to go and get a tertiary education. And so for me, I spoke to an LO teacher at the time, and she kind of steered me to getting an undergrad in marketing. And I found a degree that had a mixture of business subjects, also had things like audio visual, so for script writing. And then I even did a minor in politics because I was quite interested in that side of things.
Okay.
And for me, going on this journey, I got to dabble and be exposed to different elements of business. But the reality is we don't know what we don't know as we go into university. School doesn't equip us for the type of jobs and the opportunities that exist out there. And for me, I always had this thing about experimenting with other people's money, like get that first job, just start somewhere. If you're the intern, if you're the person who's like really at the bottom of the ladder, like where can you shoot your shot to get your opportunity? And that might be a 6-month journey or a 12-month journey. When we're young, that feels like an eternity, 6 or 12 months, right? But I think the more and more you spend experimenting and just showing up, you're exposed to so many different things. I like the idea of working in small business or startup as your first thing because you can sponge and you can get access to everyone who, the person who makes the tea, and sometimes the person who makes the tea is the CEO. So for me, I like the idea of small environments, sponging, being able to show up and bite off more than you can chew. And in today's day and age, like you can research practically anything. If you don't know something, just put up your hand and say, I don't know, but I'll figure it out. Or say, I'm on my way to figuring this thing out. People love in those positions of small business C-suite, they love being able to have access to people who are yes people and people who aren't going to BS them. Like if I can't do it, I'll put my hand up and say, hey, I really tried and I couldn't do it. I'm not going to waste any money on doing this. I thought I could figure it out. But show up as your like most willing self because you can't put passion on the CV and you can't put intuition and also critical thought. I think we've lost a lot of critical thought from the education system. People don't know how to interrogate. Now there's more and more deep fakes, fake news, AI, all these things. If you can critically analyze something, you will add so much more value to whether it's your employer or your own startup.
Yeah, I think that's so valuable. I think it's about time that we shift the way of thinking and really, really interrogate it. I think the world is just moving so fast. There's a lot of fake news, like you say. And it brings me to the question of, like going into entrepreneurship can also be very daunting. You don't know what's on the other side, but you've got to be the risk taker, right? It only takes a certain few people to go into that direction. And I just wonder, you might have experienced some challenges, and we had a very hard time. Earlier on, you mentioned we had COVID. There's lots of uncertainty. You've got people in your environment, and to bring that confidant in them, for them to trust you as the CEO, to trust you as the person who's already got the plan B, that could also be quite a daunting journey. So how do you then navigate this industry of complexities. And earlier on, you also touched on just leveraging on resources. Did you have certain allies that you kind of potentially also depended on during that time?
So, entrepreneurship, the P is sometimes interchangeable with a T, because it can be hard, right? It can be difficult. And I think that if you try and see the future too far in advance, it actually is going to become almost a state of paralysis.
Yes.
You can only almost eat that elephant one bite at a time in the now. And each day of entrepreneurship prepares you for the future days of bigger, more difficult challenges to take on. It's like the final boss in video games, right? Like you can't attempt to tackle the final boss on day one.
Yes.
And I think so many of us, we are wanting to thrive. We're wanting to get to that space where we're not ready for it yet.
Absolutely.
And I think that entrepreneurship is a journey that it is fraught with chaos. It's fraught with challenges. And, it takes the average SME in South Africa like 1,000 days to break even, if they even survive. And I think that there's a huge amount of levels that you don't realize. And fortunately, I think for the entrepreneurs out there, a lot of them do have that swagger, swank, and they're like, get to a space that they're like, I'm just going to make it happen. And I think it's this bloody mindedness and the determination that sees so many of these ventures actually make it, when on the writing of it all, on the writing on the walls, none of these people should have made it.
Yeah.
And I think what's great about the journey is that it's super organic, and you meet different people every day. Our wife talks about your network being your net worth.
Currency, your network.
Yeah. And I think that in South Africa, we are quite fortunate because we are actually never more than 1 or 2 degrees of separation from anybody.
Yeah.
And you've seen in your own journey, most people are willing to have a coffee with you, spend 15 minutes on a speed date to give you some of their time, because most people are busy, but they are willing to give because someone's had a give and take in any form of their journey, right? And I think when you and I first met, the same thing as well. Like we made time for each other, there was no agenda, and then just going out and like actually realizing that there are potential upsides for everyone. I mean, we spoke about it off air, talking about the links to people like Impumelelo Mentorship, how that spawned into some work for me, which then has spawned into some international work, because these opportunities, these serendipitous moments, they aren't hoodoo or like foo-foo kind of things. Like they actually exist, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that when you give yourself and you give of your time, like the universe actually does deliver some upside for you off the back of that. And I think that no matter what your journey is, no what you're trying to achieve, entrepreneurship gets glamorized, the entrepreneur, like in the whole French fight. But the reality is that entrepreneurship can be sexy as a white collar solution, as an app, as some kind of SaaS product, or maybe you want to be the best version of your plumbing self. Maybe you want to be an electrician. Like there's so much value within a trade, and the trade can offer you from an entrepreneurship point of view, that I think, what is your thing that really gets you out of bed in the morning? For me, it's telling stories, it's entertaining my inner child, and ultimately staying relatively immature. Like that's the stuff that wakes me up at night. Like I say to my team, we're not doctors without borders. We're not saving lives. Like if we can't entertain, create humor, move with drama and emotion, like that's our thing that we make, and that's our lane that we play in, and everybody needs a something. So if your thing is making content for a living, great. But if your thing is unblocking toilets, and you can make a great success out of life from that, you can put food on the table, and you can be proud of yourself. Like these are all the extremes and the swings and roundabouts of the various levels of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, sure. I love that. Everything is about figuring it out. It's about goal of life. We take ourselves too seriously, I feel, sometimes. And Mike, you touch on this thing called time. And I love that you've expressed it the way you have, that some things happen at a certain period in time, but eventually evolve and become something else at a different period of time. And so you then went to write 2 books. And then you also spoke about
Before AI even.
before AI. I mean, so that's really you.
Yes, legit.
The legit stuff. And so you go into writing these books. And for me, when I find my mentors, it's about firstly relating to them in something tangible, something that's relatable to me and where I want to go. And so I found your book, which was gifted to me. And I thought, you've expressed yourself in such a different way, and your love for brands, and how you've articulated how, as a personal brand, how I can best position myself. And so can you just deep dive also into that author journey, writing books, telling your story, and telling brand stories as well?
For me, like I really love writing, and I think so much of my world comprises words, like everything from the conceptual level, from the script, like so much of that stuff is what gets you excited about the end product of the pictures or the moving visuals that ultimately come off the back of the words. So for me, I believe words are the building blocks of all society, right? And for me, I think with all of these things, whatever your passion is, whatever your skill is, so whether it's making TikTok videos and generating interest and growing a community from your remarkable content, in my side, like I love writing because it's almost like a mental gym effort. It's a mental gym workout.
Yes.
So the more long form I write, the more it impacts and enhances my writing for clients, the more it allows me to take a lot of information and drill it down into more succinct concepts. So here's an entire paragraph. What's that paragraph in a tweet? And to bring that to life, like there's a real skill in being able to condense information into a lowest common denominator. So for me, that's why I write. I like giving freely of the stuff that I've learned. Like whether it's talking at a conference, I love being on stage, putting the words down in a book, which is one of the most frustrating experiences. FYI, if you're looking to write your next
On my way.
big memoir. But yeah, for me, I think that I like telling people about the excitement of the stuff behind the scenes, both positive and negative, because there's a lot of warts and all that we don't tell. And we spoke about it earlier as well about LinkedIn and how everybody puts this perception out there that everything's just Gucci, and not all of it is right.
Yeah.
Like we go through hardships, we go through struggles, and it's almost like this expectation. You don't ever want to tell the bad side because then it looks like you're moaning. And also from a magnetism point of view, clients and new business is attracted to positive stories, is attracted to protagonists. They don't want to work with someone who's mopey and complains on LinkedIn that they're only open to work and they don't have any opportunities, right? So that's why I think all entrepreneurship origin stories are a little bit Hollywoodified.
Yes.
In order to bring the glamour and the glitz to life.
Yeah.
But the reality is, it's like the hard stuff in the trenches, the struggles, the crying in the shower if you've suffered for the day, like those are the things, the cash flow, all the unsexy stuff that comes with entrepreneurship. And I think that's why most entrepreneurship endeavors fail, or most things collapse. Because we don't talk about, your cash flow is the number one killer of business, right? Because that's not a sexy origin story. And I think that so much of the stuff, the more we can communicate, the more we can tell our network, the more we can combine in these different events and tell people the real stories, then you'll look at it and be like, oh, that's just part of the journey. Like everyone goes through that. I'm not the unique one that ran out of cash and my startup hit the wall.
Yeah.
So ultimately, that's why I think thought leadership is like, it's overrated. And thought leadership, given the title, also makes it feel like it needs to be something bigger than it actually is. Hey, I had a sucky day. I'm really sorry. Let's talk about it. Or let's bury our head in the sand and move on and have a better day tomorrow.
I think you're very big on changing the status quo in a lot of things.
Thanks.
See what I did there. And Mike, it really is true. It's about us also just shaping the narrative. And I think from a broader scale as well, not just on entrepreneurship side, it's about us being the people who can be the emblem of hope in reality. And so for our growing youth and our growing individuals, we need to kind of find a way to inspire them in reality. But I do understand and I do relate to the story of pure authentic self. So how do we then show up as our purest authentic self without showing too much that could potentially be a deterrence to the direction that we want to go into, or to look like you're the person who is already a complainer, especially with our Gen Zs. There's a huge perception because of our age gap as well, that we may already go in and say, oh, my word, they complain. But maybe they're just standing their ground. Maybe it's just perspective. It's how we see things. How do we then shift that narrative in the world that we're living in on a broader scale?
It's very difficult for me because I think that if you go back to that period in like the Twitterverse, when people started tweeting and becoming Twitter influencers, there was almost this disappointment when you met so many of those people in real life. So it was like we used to have these tweet ups back in my day. And they were like these early networking events that you'd meet people that you engaged with and interacted with on Twitter. And seeing them in real life, it was horrific. They were so cool online. And they had the best way to deliver who they were. And I guess that's similar
Never
today.
made to stop. Never meet your biggest.
It's the same with like TikTok influencers, right?
Yeah.
It can be so funny and humorous, and then you meet them and they're a massive disappointment because they're not who they are authentically. And I think this point about your authentic self is so critical because for me, I would tweet anything I would say in real life. And it was never about the likes or hunting the shares and the engagements. If I thought about a funny thought and it was on the borderline of being controversial, would I say it or wouldn't it? Or wouldn't I? And if I wouldn't, then it shouldn't filter into that space. And I think that for me, when social started exploding, my position on that was people don't know jargon well enough. There's a lot of technical talk. So they're using the tech to dupe clients.
Yeah.
And then they are overcharging them and they are selling them lemons. And we saw it at the time. There were these huge scandals and corruption. I think there was like a Free State website that got sold for 140 million rand, which was just some basic WordPress template that you could download for free without even having like a premium account. And like I started off very much like, I'm not doing this to be like a David Goliath or to be like a champion or whatever it may be. But I think that for me, it was about standing up and protecting the client so that they could trust me and then I could carry favor in order to do work with them again and again. And I think the experience that I had working both in London and then working in Joburg prior to that, like I'd worked on the Virgin Money credit card business for a while. And for me, what I learned about Branson at the time was like, he would always fight battles on fronts that he could not lose on. So like when Virgin Money came into South Africa, the credit card positive and negative interest rates, and then the withdrawal fees and no card fee. No card fee was a very important moat to build around that business because the big four at the time, they could never compete with that. They couldn't turn around and say, we're switching off no card fees. Even though in the UK and other established and kind of developed markets, that was a no-brainer to have no card fee. Our system here had relied on so much pocket money for those big banks that they couldn't turn off the card fee. So they immediately, Branson knew that here's an absolute war that he could fight on all fronts. And I remember the headline, the PR agency that I worked with at the time, Tribeca, they still have that framed, one of those like citizen street polls. And that thing says 60,000 new virgins. And that was the number in the first 6 weeks. And it just showed you like, being able to have 2 or 3 really strong key messages that you could hammer home, those things will allow you to really bring the story to life. And I think, going down this very long rabbit hole of like authentic self, I think there were moments that I took from each of these things to stand up for clients without bad mouthing the existing industry behemoths who were essentially making a quick buck off a new piece of tech. And I think that by being consistent, by turning down work that I couldn't deliver on or connecting people who were the right partners, I never had this selfish approach to business. And my wife talks about it, about the energy of money. For me, like if you are desperate, there's almost like this desperation odor. It's worse than
it just goes soft.
Exactly. Whereas you open your hands and you're willing to give and take, whether it's financial or whether it's like a mental, you ultimately are opening up yourself to these engagements and these opportunities. People will remember you for that stuff. People will remember the time you said, no, thanks, I'm not the right person for this, but I can introduce you to that person. Like, I believe so much of the stuff is like capitalist karma.
Yes. I hear you. Sure. What a long-winded quick answer. But so strong.
So long-winded.
So important. And then Mike, in that long-winded response, you then speak about consistency. And you were intentional about saying, choose your focus. You've got, those 3 things that you.
And that's hard because I've got I think undiagnosed adult ADHD.
I think we all do. I mean, I was listening to a podcast and with Mal Robbins and they were talking about this ADHD being affiliated to a lot of other things, but there's also goodness with anxiety sometimes. You're preparing for something, you're anxious, but anyway, we're going on a tangent. You and I always do this. So it brings me back to consistency. And I can imagine it is hard. In my young years of 29, almost 30, I've started to see that it's very easy to digress from focusing on one thing because the world is big. There's so many nice things, and I can imagine that you would have had to reel it in quite often, especially in entrepreneurship. And I think it's an important time for us to be really realistic about the journey.
Yes.
And to talk about, what is that consistent focus and what is that niche that you would go into as a starting entrepreneur or someone who thinks entrepreneurship is for them. I mean, Nomdeni a few weeks ago in the episode we recorded had said, maybe it's just not for you. How do you even evaluate that?
For me, like I always wanted to work for people first because I wanted to get some exposure to a landscape that I was unfamiliar with. And I think we come into the working world actually quite naive because school teaches you there are like 7 jobs in the whole world, whereas you realize that there's like 7 silos in one department of one corporate, right?
True.
And I think that working for someone first is invaluable because you get to realize very quickly what you don't know. You don't understand the ecosystem of so many different things. There's finance, there's product, there's place, there's all these different things, right? And I think that, for me, that's like, I think that was an important part of my journey. Also, then I had this hunger when I got to about 25, 26, where I was like, I know the answers to this stuff. These established OGs and doyens of an industry, they don't know it. They don't understand social. They don't understand how it plugs in. Like, I think that there's a gap for me in this space. And I think that entrepreneurship is very big bang. Like you've got expansion and contraction of ideas consistently.
Yeah.
And for me, when we started, like our hyper focus was around amplification. Like you couldn't buy YouTube ads, you couldn't buy Facebook ads, you couldn't buy any of the stuff. So there was a large reliance on word of mouth, and word of mouth sat in the sweet spot of PR and traditional media where I played. So those initial jobs with the likes of Nando's, with the likes of SAB brands like Miller at the time, like our job was really to create talkability around something that they were doing. So Nando's great at the ads, but now how do you get people to talk about the brand outside of just the ad? So we would create these bolt-on opportunities for, there was Last Dictator and there was this work with Mugabe. And then we said, well, let's talk about the people, 5 people living or dead that you would love to take to dinner. And then that linked back the dinner ritual of Nando's. And it created a whole bunch of talkability that then spilled over into other markets, other territories. The viral gods shine down on you and someone posts something. But ultimately, hyper focus for me is a superpower. And you don't know what you don't know. But in a service business in particular, like you will realize very quickly what is the thing that you are super strong at? What's the thing that you can make money quickly with, that you aren't duping anybody and that you're able to bring cash flow into your startup very quickly? Because off the back of that, writing press releases, maybe that's your focus. When you just start out and you work with brands and with agencies, and then it starts giving you an opportunity to flow off the back of that. Then you'll start realizing as you level up, as you start heading towards the phase, that boss of that level, then you'll realize, oh, actually I can do more. I mean, it went from 2010 when we launched to 2015, 2016 when we started winning our first clients as the lead creative agency. So it took us 6 years just to start expanding into a space like we can write the script. We can then work with the production company to make that brand new content. We can then post the social content. So it's a really long journey. And I think from some of the research in this book or the other one, it was like the average entrepreneur is like 48 years old. So there is no rush on this journey. There's so much hard work. There's so much growing up. There's so much business acumen maturing that you need to go through as a youth. And for me, you don't have to personally mature. That's an optional. But ultimately, that's the stuff that you're going through to ready you and prepare you for those bigger battles, bigger budgets, bigger cash flow clashes. Sounds like a lot more like epic. Talking about spreadsheets as battles.
Oh, that's so much fun.
But I think ultimately, my greatest upside was learning how to speak spreadsheet, learning how to read management accounts, really like getting able to understand the minutiae of your business. When you start, unless you're a CA, you're generally going to be quite naive into all of the inner workings of a business.
Absolutely. I've had a few fails here and there. We're still building, we're learning. It's a journey.
That's it.
And Mike, as we wrap up, 15 years later, I can really imagine there's been moments of giving up, moments of potentially taking the offer to sell, or to say, I've done my best and I'm handing over. But what's that determining factor that says, I'm not done yet, and the journey should continue, and I'm not giving up on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate because I've done a deal in the early days of the business, and there are extreme highs and extreme lows. And, there's the dopamine hits of like getting the headline in Business Day and people like being so stoked for you. But I think the reality is like there's something priceless and immeasurable about your freedom. And I think as hard as entrepreneurship is, you realize a state of freedom that you've never had before in any other space. And I mean, like now I can go and my kids are playing a sporting fixture. I can drop a function and I can just head to it. There's nobody owns me. And I think the more you continue on this journey, it becomes like a superpower because you realize how important your ownership of yourself is. You're not a slave to any system. You're not a slave to a timesheet. If someone is rude to you, you can honestly and legitimately stand up for yourself. If someone's rude to your staff, you can back them. And I think that ultimately, like, there's this level of zen that comes with this. And as I start heading, towards my mid-40s and beyond, I think that ultimately it's just like it's one of these things that you start hitting true nirvana the longer you've been on this journey. And that's why I think that if you can create something and you can build it, like try and build a legacy, like take that thing into the future. And look at David Ogilvy. He started Ogilvy when he was like 37, 38 years old. And now it's a brand that is the most popular advertising brand globally. It's still there today, his signature. And it's something that's outlived him. It's outlived his children. And like, that's a really cool thing. I mean, I think that there's so much excitement within something that, doesn't necessarily have to like go over and fall over into your kids, into their territory. But, the fact that people are still running a module, they're running a belief system, they're running a structure, they're running a culture that you started out in a garage, in a basement, in the back of a coffee shop or a co-working space.
I love the garage.
That's cool.
I love the garage concept, just by the way. Obsessed. It might just be me at some point. It might just be me, start at home. Right? Why not? Like, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've left us with so many nuggets of wisdom. I hope our young people can take this and soak it in. Future entrepreneurs, future developers, future tech gurus, they can use this information to really amplify their journey. Thank you so much, Mike. It's been
so much.
Exceptional.
Thank you so much. You're a rock star.